Let's dive right into this explainer and unpack South Asia's longest-running ethnic and political dispute, the Indo-Naga peace process. Whether you're interested in indigenous rights, constitutional law, or even global supply chain risks, understanding this incredible journey from colonial isolation to today's highly complex geopolitical reality is absolutely crucial. To help us navigate a whole century of dense political history without getting lost, we're going to structure things today around 5 key milestones. We'll look at the roots of Naga nationalism, statehood in Article 371A, factional splits, the two competing peace accords, and finally, the current geopolitical and investment risks. All right, part 1, the roots of Naga nationalism, from isolation to identity. Now, here's a detail you might find wild. The catalyst for a unified Naga consciousness didn't actually start locally, it started globally. Before colonial intervention, Naga tribes largely lived in independent, self-governing, and isolated villages. But during World War I, around 2,000 Nagas were unexpectedly recruited to serve in France in the 21st Labor Corps. Just imagine that intense culture shock. This deployment gave many of them their very first direct glimpse of the world beyond their traditional homelands, and that exposure actually united diverse tribes under a newly shared identity. So when they returned, this shared identity evolved super fast. By 1918, those war veterans formed a social club, which quickly matured into a formal demand for autonomy. Fast forward to 1929, and they were explicitly asking the British Simon Commission to be left entirely alone once the British withdrew. This whole movement eventually culminated in 1947 with the 9-Point Agreement, which was an early, albeit pretty fragile, attempt by the transitioning Indian state to grant the Naga people significant judicial and executive autonomy. Moving right along to Part 2, Statehood and Article 371A, Asymmetric Federalism. When that 1947 agreement collapsed over bitter disagreements about a 10-year clause, decades of armed conflict followed. To find a constitutional middle ground, moderate Naga leaders and the Indian government signed the 16-Point Agreement in 1960, officially birthing the state of Nagaland. Now, the bedrock of this agreement was the insertion of Article 371A into the Indian Constitution. This is basically a masterclass in asymmetric federalism, meaning Nagaland plays by significantly different rules than the rest of India. Central parliamentary acts regarding Naga customary law or the ownership of land and resources simply do not apply without the state assembly's explicit approval. It completely blocked the central government's standard power of eminent domain. And to be clear, this protection is absolute. Former Chief Minister Dr. S.C. Jamir, who was actually an original signatory of the 1960 agreement, made it crystal clear. He noted that land and its resources wasn't just about farming rights. It specifically covers highly valuable minerals, including petroleum. This meant that striking oil in Nagaland fell strictly under local legislation, not central government control. That is a massive economic shift that fundamentally reshapes investment realities in the region to this very day. Which brings us to Part 3, Factional Splits and Schisms, the Broken Consensus. Even after achieving statehood, the unified nationalist movement violently fractured from the inside out. It all started with the controversial 1975 Shillong Accord, which mandated unconditional disarmament and the acceptance of the Indian Constitution. While hardline factions, who were heavily armed and operating out of bases in Myanmar, viewed this as total capitulation. This ideological divide sparked violent internal purges, creating the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, or NSCN, in 1980. Then, just 8 years later, the group tore itself apart all over again, this time along bitter tribal and geographic lines, creating the rival IM and K factions that dominate the landscape today. All right, Part 4, two competing peace accords, shared sovereignty versus state-centric. So, this complex web of factions means the Indian government is currently navigating two totally parallel roadmaps for peace. We're placing these side by side to stay completely impartial. On the one hand, you have the 2015 Framework Agreement driven by the NSCN-IM, which seeks to creatively redefine borders. On the other hand, you have the 2017 Agreed Position, championed by a conglomerate of 7 state-centric insurgent factions, known as the WCN-NPGs. And they largely accept existing political realities within the Indian Union. Looking closer at the 2015 agreement from the NSCN-IM, this is a bold pitch for shared sovereignty. It acknowledges the people as the ultimate source of sovereign power and proposes a pan-Naga Hoho, basically an executive body designed to operate across all Naga-inhabited areas, completely ignoring current state lines. But the whole thing stalled out in 2020 over a single word: new. The NSCNIM demanded their relationship with India be defined as a new political relationship between two sovereign entities. They absolutely refused to let their decades-long political movement be treated by the state as a simple domestic law and order issue. On the flip side, the 2017 agreed position offers a highly specific, pragmatic blueprint to restructure Nagaland's local governance from the inside out. It proposes upgrading to a two-house legislature, where a new upper house would empower traditional tribal elders to legislate directly on customary laws and resources. The goal here is very practical. Boost the local economy, significantly expand tribal representation for the 17 recognized tribes, and inject targeted infrastructure funding right into historically underdeveloped border areas. And you can literally see these high-level ideologies clashing on the ground over places like the Ntangi Reserve Forest. The NSCNIM views this highly contested forest as part of their borderless, shared sovereignty model. The WCNPGs, however, fiercely argue that the forest belongs exclusively to the local people and absolutely cannot be used as a political bargaining chip to settle insurgent members. It really is a perfect encapsulation of their differing worldviews. Finally, Part 5. Geopolitical and investment risks. Navigating the status quo. So, what does this dual accord stalemate actually mean for, say, a corporate stakeholder or infrastructure developer trying to operate in the region today? Well, it means massive hurdles. Thanks to Article 371A, strict land ownership protections cause severe infrastructure delays. Supply chains are choked by informal tariffs levied by armed factions running parallel taxation networks. And to make matters even more volatile, a 2023 federal amendment now allows security projects near international borders to bypass local village consent. That creates a massive legal and social flashpoint that risks severe community backlash. Looking at the risk analysis, the most highly probable scenario right now is a prolonged ceasefire. While a complete merging of the two peace agreements is moderately possible, the status quo is highly likely to hold. For the foreseeable future, parallel governance, localized strikes, and significantly high operational costs are just the reality. Anyone doing business there has to step very, very carefully to navigate a delicate minefield of overlapping customary laws and central regulations. As we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with a provocative question that really sits at the heart of South Asia's longest-running dispute. Can a unique model of shared sovereignty genuinely coexist with the rigid, established boundaries of a modern nation-state? It's a lot to think about. Thanks so much for exploring this fascinating piece of geopolitical history with me today.